Good morning, everybody. Now I would like to start today's AGI seminar. I'm R3.12.21, the research director of AGI. It's my honor to serve as the moderator of today's AGI seminar. The speaker of today's seminar is Professor Nazrul Islam. As we know, Professor Islam is a very famous economist, particularly in the field of the development economics. Now, he is the chief of the development research branch of the United Nations. He's very, very busy. Some of us also know, I think, he was the research professor and chairman of the exchange committee of AGI about 15 years ago, I think, yeah. He is very busy, but first I want to express my thanks to Professor Islam for arranging time to give us a talk. We know Professor Islam has published a lot of high quality journal papers and at least more than 10 academic books. But today his topic will focus on the rural development. So now let's welcome Professor Islam. Roughly speaking, your presentation, the total time for today's seminar is 90 minutes. 60 minutes for your presentation and 30 minutes for discussion, okay?
Okay, so first of all, I'm very pleased to be with you. As Dr. Dai mentioned, I was at AGI, which used to be called ICSIAD at that time for several years, and those were very productive years. And we, together with other colleagues of ICSIAD at that time, published quite a few, journal articles and a book, etc. So I very much, cherish those years, and I, was with AGI for all these years as a visiting position. So I always felt connected with this institution, and through Dr. Dai, Eric Ramstetter, and I also regularly attended these EAEA conferences where I used to meet a lot of colleagues from AGI. So there is kind of ongoing connection with AGI. So I'm pleased to come back and offer this seminar, this talk, and hope this will help us to get reconnected on a more kind of closer level. So as Dr. Dai mentioned, today I will talk about rural development, and I will try to show why this is an important topic and what are the new ideas that have emerged in this regard. So let me first share. I prepared a PowerPoint file. So let me share that file so that we can efficiently use the time that has been allocated for me. Okay, so I'm sharing this.
Yeah, can you share?
Yes, I'm sharing. So let me first, I'll also go for the, okay. So, so that's the topic, rural development in the context of fourth industrial revolution. So before I start the content, I just have to clear up two issues. One is, as you know, there is some controversy about this expression fourth industrial revolution. Some do not think that is the right one. So there are two views. One is those who agree that this is the right expression to use. There are others who think that no, it's not really a new revolution. It's just a continuation of the digital revolution. Klaus Schwab, who is the founder and chairman of the World Economic Forum, very influential, he is one of the scholars and authorities who is championing this fourth industrial revolution concept, and he has written already 2 books on this subject. So the point that I want to make is that we don't have to make a decision. So that whether we call it fourth industrial revolution or a continuation of digital revolution, it's fine. I mean, the thing that I will present is not affected by this terminological issue. In fact, at DESA, the United Nations, we also coined a new term called frontier technologies. Frontier technologies, because just to avoid this controversy, which may refer, some people may interpret as fourth industrial revolution, others may interpret as the continuation of digital revolution. So that's the first point. The other point is, the presentation that I will make draws upon two recent research reports that we have published. One is called the World Social Report, titled Reconsidering Rural Development. It's a recent report. And also along similar lines, we have brought out a special issue on frontier technologies. It's called Frontier Technologies for Smallholders, Addressing Information Asymmetries Deficiencies. So these are, as you can see, interconnected. So I will often refer some of the things that we found in these two reports. And anyone interested in more details, they can always go to DESA website and they can find the full text of this report. Okay, so let me first begin with, since we are talking about rural development in the context of fourth industrial revolution, so naturally the question arises what we are comparing with. Let's compare it with the pre-industrial cities, that is cities that were before first industrial revolution. First of all, as you know, there's a basic difference between rural and urban is that urban areas have high density of population compared to rural areas. Now, there is no clear-cut demarcation, what is the density level that should be crossed to be designated as urban, and actually depends from country to country. For example, I come from Bangladesh. It is so densely populated that if you apply the criteria of, say, United States, then entire Bangladesh will be urban, which is actually not the case. But anyway, that's the basic distinction, that urban areas are those which have relatively high density of population. Now, in the pre-industrial era, before first industrial revolution, there were cities. Those were cities mainly of three types. One was the political kind of city, administrative, where the emperor used to have their court, etc., etc. Then there were cities which were based on trade, like many Mediterranean cities were basically on trade. And then there were cities which were based on handicraft manufacturing. These are pre-industrial, so basically the motive power was muscle power, and there were basically, so basically in Europe, where the handicraft manufacturing was organized along the guild system, so they had medieval cities based on this, where a lot of this handicrafts organized in guild system were concentrated. However, in other areas during the medieval period, where this same handicraft technology-based manufacturing was dispersed in villages, like in India. In India, there is a particular way of combining these handicraft manufacturers with the peasants in a kind of self-sufficient villages. So the basic point here is that although there were cities with manufacturing handicraft, but these were not qualitatively different from what the handicraft manufacturing could be observed in villages. So that means the difference between the cities and villages in pre-industrial era was not qualitative, the technological difference was nothing fundamental. Okay? That's where the main change came about with the first industrial revolution. As you know, first industrial revolution, basically there was a switch from muscle power to machine power, and which were driven by steam engines. And so production became based on machines. There was extension of divisional labor, as Adam Smith, famous in his Wealth of Nations, started this division of labor. Then because of this application of machine, the production became of much large scale, unlike handicraft, which are very small scale. And that also required congregation of people. So a lot of people have to be together to perform this machine, etc., etc. And so production moved from household to factories. So the factory system evolved. This is something entirely new. And then, of course, there was subsequently agglomeration benefits that allow cities to grow. And so what the main thing is that we now have cities which are based on new technology. So the technology of manufacturing that converted, that were the backbone of the new cities was entirely different from the technology in the rural areas. So in the rural areas, the agriculture still remained pre-industrial, using pre-industrial technologies based on muscle power of humans and animals, etc., etc. And then we know that urbanization. I am not talking about the industrial urbanization that is after first industrial revolution. Basically, it took two forms. One is called the classical, which is where the pre-existing cities grew and became larger in size because of this new manufacturing, new factories, etc. And then, of course, there were also greenfield urbanization, which means in an entirely new area because of some favorable circumstances, confluences. Those also, a lot of factories were established in that area, and it grew as a new urban sector. So that's what happened with the Industrial Revolution. So first Industrial Revolution, so we have switched from muscle to machine power, and that switch first began with manufacturing. So manufacturing required physical congregation of large number of people. So we have rise of cities, new cities. These are characterized by much higher productivity and different technology, focused on manufacturing, machine-based. Rural areas remain focused on agriculture with relatively low productivity, and that gave to the rise of rural-urban divide. Now this divide is based on technology. So that's what the main, impact of industrialization was in terms of the spatial combination of, habitation of people. And so that divide that we just talked about, was reinforced by particularly in currently developing countries by the colonial rule. So many of these countries were under colonial rule. And during that colonial rule, what happened, first of all, the manufacturing did not blossom in those countries as they did in the early industrialized countries. And whatever manufacturing developed in those economies, those became those attained enclave characters. That means they were not well connected through forward and backward linkages with the rest of the economy. So in a sense, these cities of these colonial countries became even more distant from the agriculture. So the divide between agriculture and rural, or rural and urban, became much more pronounced in these countries. And because of this lack of development, and absence of demographic transition, what happened is that the emergence of surplus labor, in rural surplus labor in these countries, and that's the background which Arthur Lewis used to put forward his Lewis growth model. So this is the way in which the rural-urban divide got reinforced. In the sense, we originally, as I just showed, it began with this technology, new industrial revolution. We have this divide, and that divide, economic divide, technological divide, got translated into divide in political power. So then urban areas with more political power, they started favoring policies that were more favorable for urban economy. So that's how the rural-urban divide became reinforced and entrenched. Okay, so we know Lewis growth model. So Lewis growth model, actually, when I was here at AGI or ICSID, I wrote a paper on Lewis growth model, China's industrialization growth in the light of Lewis model. So I don't want to go into the details here. So basic, as you know, the basic story of Lewis model is that it assumed the rural economy to have surplus labor, so low marginal productivity. As you can see, the marginal productivity, MPLR is the rural marginal productivity of rural labor, which is low, much low compared to marginal productivity of urban areas. So the idea of Lewis was that if we can transfer more labor from this low productivity rural area to urban area, then we get growth. So that's the simplest way in which rural Lewis growth model could be presented. Of course, if you're more interested, you can take a look at this paper, which gives a more, comprehensive treatment of the issue. Anyway, so So this Lewis model suggested that the story of development and growth is basically a story of transfer of rural labor into urban areas. So what happened is that many developing countries which became independent after Second World War in the 50s and 60s, Lewis growth model came out in 1954, as you know. So in the 60s, they thought they took Lewis model as basically suggesting that all you have to do is transfer labor to urban areas, and that will automatically take care of rural problems. Okay? So the focus was on urban development. That's it. So focus on the development of urban economy, and that will gradually shrink the rural area because more of this labor is moving to urban areas. So that's how the urban economy will grow, as a whole national economy grow, and the rural economy will just shrink, and that is how this problem will be solved. And in this regard, they actually looked at the state of affairs that say in the 60s or 70s that they could see in the developed countries. Like if they looked at UK or US or Japan, these are of course very recent, but even in 60s these were much so what do we see in 2018? The share of agriculture in GDP in UK is only 0.6%. In US, it is only 0.86. In Japan, it's 1.14. So in the 60s, maybe these were much higher, but not, like developing countries, GDP from agriculture at that time was 80% or 85%. So they thought that that is the way to go. So we'll have and the rural share of rural population, total population is Japan is 8.38. And UK and US is around 20%. So that's the idea. That's the model they took, and that's how they viewed Lewis model. So the point is that we'll just this policy prescription they derive from Lewis model is that we'll just focus on the urban development of the urban economy, transfer rural labor to urban, and that will give us growth. And we don't have to do anything in the rural areas. That is the. However, in doing so, in focusing on the situation of the countries, early industrialized countries, after they have already transferred the economies, it was a mistake because they needed to see what was at the beginning when the transformation process started. And if they had taken care of doing that, they would see that both in early industrializing countries and also the newly industrializing countries, Japan is one, and East Asian countries, some of the East Asian countries are other. In all these countries, actually, we see that actually growth of productivity of agriculture and rural economy preceded and served as a precondition for successful industrial development. So that's the important part of the history that they missed. They just focused on what happened after the transformation, but not what was at the beginning of the transition, which was more relevant for them because they were also at the beginning and they could take lessons from that part of the experience, which would have suggested that actually it's necessary to have growth of productivity in agriculture and rural economy to launch the industrialization process. Okay, so as a result of this, neglect of rural development, what we have is that a situation where we still have most of the countries poor countries, largely rural. So that largely rural countries remain to be poor countries because they did not pay much attention to the task of improving the productivity of agriculture and rural economy. So now in that report that I just mentioned, we offered some quantitative information on that. And and also the other thing that we can see is that the relative divide and the disparity or the difference in per capita income of rural and urban residents is very pronounced. As we saw, for example, in some groups of the countries, the rural economy, rural per capita GDP is only 55 to 65%. And of the average GDP, national average. And also about 71.3% of the rural population live in countries where agriculture per capita is lower than the per capita income of the country as a whole. And actually the 80% of people who are below poverty line are in rural areas. So this is what happened because of this relative neglect of the rural development and rural economy, partly because of the wrong way in which this Lewis growth model was, perceived or interpreted. Obviously, that was not what Arthur Lewis had in his mind, but that's what has happened. So given this context, what we have is that, and also what is worrisome is that you, on the one hand, you neglect the rural economy, and you thought that they will move to urban economy, and that's how the problem will be solved. But that did not. But to one can move to the urban economy, but getting a decent job and allowing him or her to actually have the kind of life that he or she wanted is a different thing. And what happened is that because of this, let me show you a vicious cycle here. So you have lack of rural development. So you have lack of rural development. So, and that creates pressure for migration from rural to urban areas. But because the population of the rural areas is the almost 70%, 80%. So that's the majority. That the bulk of the population rural. So if you don't have development there, your domestic demand remains constrained. Domestic market remains constrained, and if your domestic market remains constrained, you cannot grow the economy as a whole. So as a result, urban economy could not create enough jobs for the rural migrants. So lack of growth also prevented lack of investment in the rural economy. So that led to a persistent lack of rural development. So many countries were caught in this vicious cycle because of this phenomenon. So this is what I was just referring to. As you can see, the rural countries are mostly poor countries. So low-income countries, 67% of the population are rural. Okay? Similarly, in the lower middle class, 60%, and again, they're low. So if you can take together, you see the bulk of the population are in the poor countries. Or being rural country became synonymous with being poor country. That's the unfortunate situation that we found. Anyway, so let me skip a few slides. You may look at them, and this is just one very telling one. This shows the net capital stock per worker in agriculture relative to the high-income countries, and you can see this is the curve for the low-income countries. Okay? Their capital accumulation rural in agriculture is just below 3% compared to what we find in high-income countries. So that obviously explains the kind of the neglect, or with such low capital accumulation, obviously you cannot expect high productivity. That's the situation. Okay, so let me skip this and come to okay. So the conclusion here is that we have this poverty challenge. So rural development, because of insufficient rural development, we have this poverty challenge. So that is, in order to address this poverty challenge, we need to address rural development issue. However, there is another challenge associated with it, which is the environmental challenge. What we mean by that, that means that because of the rural development, that successful rural development in developed countries, however, proceeded in a way often which was not environmentally sustainable. Because in many cases, so what they did is they could successfully industrialize the agriculture. They could, whereas machines were initially introduced in manufacturing sector, but over time they could introduce machines in agriculture sector too. So that led to industrialization of agriculture. However, the way that proceeded led to exhaustion of natural resources and degradation of environment. And as you know, agriculture is one of the primary sectors contributing to the greenhouse gas emissions that creates climate change. And also because of this extensive nature of expansion of agriculture, the forest, a lot of forest and wilderness, they have just disappeared. And that has created a new problem, which is that because if you cut down forest and take away wilderness, you actually constrict animal habitats. And that then creates increases the interface between the human habitats and animal habitats, and that is one of the reasons why we are having these zoonotic epidemics, like this COVID-19, and we had other similar zoonotic epidemics recently in recent decades. So this is another way in which the current way of agricultural development is proving to be environmentally not sustainable. So we have two challenges to the rural development that has occurred so far. One is the poverty challenge, and the other is environmental challenge. Whereas the poverty challenge is mostly a problem of the low-income countries, but this environmental challenge is a global challenge. It's a problem of both high-income countries and also low-income countries, all countries. So this is just an illustration of some of the things that I just said. For example, this is the this graph. This graph shows the extent of use of water. As you know, most of the surface, these freshwater resources are now actually utilized, and some of the rivers are not, they cannot have any. They don't have any water to carry to the sea. They just dry up before they reach the seas. And also, chemical use of huge amount of chemical fertilizer, that is also causing another problem. So there are a lot of this slide they have provide some of the information in that region. So anyway, in this rather disappointing scenario regarding rural development in most developing countries, we have also some positive examples too. One of the things is that many countries made an effort to minimize this rural-urban divide. Okay? And one way that they do it, which is in literature is being referred to as a model of in-Situ urbanization. Actually, it's rather a model of rural development, but the way it is generally referred to as in-Situ urbanization, although it's actually a model of rural development. What is it? Actually, this is basically an conscious attempt to minimize the rural-urban divide that we already discussed at the beginning. How do they do that? We see several models in this regard. So, for example, just to take a few examples, one is the example of Japan. We also looked at the example of Sri Lanka, which is actually, there's a study that was done by one of the Japanese scholars, which helped us to see what is going on in Sri Lanka. And also, many of you are from China, so it should be of interest to you, is the example of China. So let me just say a few words in each case. For example, in Japan, what did they do? In Japan, for example, it had these land reforms in 1946. And as I said previously, that in most cases, both in early industrializing countries and newly industrializing countries, initially there was a spate of development, productivity development in the rural economy, which that provided the background for the subsequent urban industrial development. So in Japan, there was land reform. There was agricultural cooperatives, 1948, which helped to kind of establish the infrastructure, particularly the connectivity of the rural areas with the urban centers. And so that is one. The second is Japan is one of the unique features of Japanese way of minimizing the divide is this fiscal measure, which is one of those fiscal measures is the price subsidy to rice. So which allowed the farmers to have raise their income, which otherwise would have been the case without this support. And so that's another one. The third element is the spread of manufacturing in the peri-urban areas. So because of the good infrastructure, many of the rural households could diversify. So they could diversify their use of time, their labor, so earn income from non-agricultural sources. So as you can see, this is a graph which shows to what extent this has become important for Japan. As you can see, these bars are total income, the black bars, and these red bars are the income that is derived from agriculture. Okay? So as you can see, although initially, they maybe were 50% or close to 50%, but over time, the share of agriculture, income from agriculture in the total income of rural households has declined significantly. Now it is, maybe 20% or, So that's one way in which we see the difference in income between rural and urban areas to have been minimized in Japan. So if we look at Sri Lanka, one of the developing countries, which took a different route, which is they from the very beginning adopted a policy called rural first, which is that the priority has to be given to the demands and the necessity of the rural people. So to do that, they adopted a system called hub and spoke system, which is that, Sri Lanka, let me show you the map. Sri Lanka is a relatively small country. This is 100 kilometers. So the entire width of the country may be less than 200 kilometers. So it's a relatively small country. And so the distances of the rural areas from the neighboring towns are relatively short, say maybe 20 kilometers maximum. So what they did is in order to minimize the any disparity, they use these these towns as the hub for all kinds of services, good quality services, education, health, government services, entertainment, and also employment. So that people from the surrounding areas, and they also developed infrastructure, particularly bus transportation, and they provide a subsidy to the bus transportation so that people could easily come to these towns for meeting all these kind of services and still reside in rural areas. So that is one way in which Sri Lanka tried to handle this problem, and it was quite successful. As you know, Sri Lanka, it became the middle income country in 2019, with 81.3% of the population still being rural, which is unique. Something and almost opposite to some other countries like UK, USA, where you saw that the rural population is about 20%. But here is a country which has 80% rural, but yet achieving high upper middle income status. Finally, in case of China, we know that another experiment of minimizing rural-urban divide, and this was through mixing industry with agriculture in rural areas. And this actually started, I think, this is something, particularly those who are from China, I don't have to explain to them. It started with a great leap forward in 1958-62, when these communes were created. And one of the program of important component of Great Leap Forward was to do manufacturing in rural areas, like backyard furnaces, etc., etc. Although many of those things did not go well, like backyard furnaces did not produce good quality steel, so this whole program had to be scrapped. But what it created the institutional framework in rural areas which could organize and undertake manufacturing and industrial production. So when the communes were disbanded, that institutional structure somewhat remained, and it was renamed or reincarnated in the form of township village governments. And that is why when the industrial reform started in 1984, and there was scope of manufacturing outside the state-owned enterprises, and also actually to do manufacturing to supply both input and also to absorb output of state-owned manufacturing enterprises, there was a sudden mushrooming of this huge number of township village enterprises. And so much so that in the 90s, they accounted for about 1/3 of China's entire industrial production. Okay? So although that later those were mostly privatized, but they still remain, and they provide the Chinese rural people a big source of employment and also income. So that's another model that we see that was adopted to kind of to bring closer and also to reduce the difference between the urban and rural areas. So anyway, so that's the experience. On the one hand, to summarize, on the one hand, we see that most of the developing countries, low-income countries, they were not very successful at rural development, and also that did not lead them to be successful at overall development. The countries, so that created the poverty challenge. And then we have the countries which were successful, which industrialized agriculture. They did so in a way that led to this emergence of the environmental challenge. But on the other hand, we also see some experiences where policies were adopted which to minimize the rural-urban divide. Now, in this context, the question is the way forward. So how do we go ahead? Now, in considering this way forward, the future way to proceed with regard to rural development, we have to take note that we are already in the context of fourth industrial revolution, or this, as I said, frontier technologies. So I will use the term fourth industrial revolution just for convenience's sake, not that you have to believe in fourth industrial revolution. So what are the key features of fourth industrial revolution from the viewpoint of rural development? First of all, is the digital connectivity. Okay, so as you know, the COVID, among all its negative impact, one of the significant positive development that happened during COVID is the possibility and the actual practice of remote work. So we can all now, for example, now I'm giving a seminar from New York, and some of you are joining from China, and some from different parts of Japan. So this was although technologically it was becoming possible, but COVID gave a big push for this to actually materialize. So anyway, now we know that we can do remote work. So that means previously many of the jobs which were considered to be urban, that you have to be in urban areas to perform those jobs, is no longer valid. You could as well perform those similar jobs like editing jobs. You edit a book, you don't have to be in the city. You could be in a countryside, in a village, and still do the editing from there, without any difficulty. A lot of other research, right? Services, often like this healthcare, telemedicine, or education, etc., etc. So that's a big change that we now have because of this digital connectivity. What that means is that the previous, and also there is another benefit of urbanization that is sometimes referred to as agglomeration. So that means you have, that's why similar industries congregate in the same area. But instead of physical agglomeration, we can now have virtual agglomeration. So that means you don't have to physically together in order to have those spillovers and externalities, etc., etc. You can simply have that in a virtual world. And so these developments have done two things. One is it has taken away the technological underpinning of the rural-urban divide, the underpinning that emerged from the first industrial revolution. So the fact that some areas has to be more densely populated in order to carry out certain functions, that does not any longer hold. Although it has not become universal now, but we already see the beginnings of that. Okay? And also with this digital connectivity, there is also enhanced physical connectivity. Right? Now the transportation system, we now see that artificial intelligence being applied to create driverless vehicles, etc., etc. So for example, the hub and spoke system that we see in Sri Lanka implemented so well, it could be now expanded on a much larger scale. Some of the larger countries can also adopt this because of the advances in physical connectivity. So we have both digital connectivity and enhanced physical connectivity because of the fourth industrial revolution technologies, which are completely changing the context in which you can now think about the rural development. Then, so another important technology, fourth industrial revolution technology, which is emerging and actually spreading, which will revolutionize completely the paradigm of rural development, is the 3D printing. The 3D printing, three-dimensional printing, which is additive printing. So instead of it does not entail any wastage of materials, so it saves resources. Also, you can, with 3D printing, you can print only per order. You don't have to produce large number of articles, large number of units of this product, and then just wait for customers to buy them and keep them in the shelf. And in many cases they remain unsold, and then you dump them. All these things will be history, because with 3D printing you produce only when you get an order. So that's another change. Then you can have customized production. So you can customize each individual item according to the requirements of the customer. And the other thing is that you can do on-site manufacturing. So you can produce the article right near the consumer instead of having that consumer to be come, or the product need to be transported to him or her across a long distance. That you don't have to do. So what is happening is that because of 3D printing, what happened during the first industrial revolution is now getting reversed. And those of you who know a little bit of Hegel has this concept of negation as a way, as a description of certain processes. Like, for example, in this case, what do we see? We see that in the pre-industrial phase, we had manufacturing dispersed across households and villages. Okay? And then with the Industrial Revolution, we come to the era of concentration, which is factory production. Okay? And now, because of this fourth industrial revolution technology, which is doing away with the necessity of physical congregation, post-industrial manufacturing can again be dispersed. It can become a boutique operation, like FedEx. You go to the corner FedEx to print or copy a document. It's a similar similar to that. You have a corner shop where you can go and you can have your product manufactured there, and you bring it to home. So that's if when that technology expands, this very difference between urban and rural areas because of manufacturing concentrated in requiring concentration of people will just vanish. And then we have the entirely different paradigm of even distribution of population. Instead of certain areas having high density and being regarded urban, whereas other areas low density and being regarded rural. Of course, we will need agriculture, and agriculture requires land. So, where agriculture dominated parts of the country, for that reason, will have less population. But many people, if they want to do these kind of jobs while being in countryside, enjoying the outdoors, the nature, etc., then additional people can move there. So that means the density of equalization of density of population has become something that is that can already be envisioned going forward. Now, some of the things may appear to be too futuristic, but actually it is not. Here's an example of 3D printing actually being practiced in Myanmar, which is a developing country. So it's 3D printing is not a very futuristic proposition that is only relevant for very highly developed countries like Japan or US or Germany. Here is an example, if you have time, you can read it, where a manufacturing company in Myanmar is using 3D printing technology to produce high quality farming tools. And those farming tools, so the social entrepreneur, and the farmers are helping to accelerate the prototyping and the switch and traditional making farming tools that are fit for the purpose, okay? That are exactly suitable for that particular region, for the particular operations that they would like to do. So this is just one example in which the technology is spreading. So you can imagine if at the rate of the progress, it won't take too long when we'll see this the spread of 3D technologies to a much wider scale. So this is just one example, but the new technologies, the fourth industrial revolution technologies, can be applied, will find application in many other ways. For example, this is some material that I'm drawing from that frontier technology issue that I just mentioned at the very beginning. So, for example, in that paper, they examine what are the different points of agricultural production. And here you can see 8 points of important the phases of production process of the rural farming or agriculture, and they show in detailed way what are the new technologies that can influence all these particular points at this can change the process and bring it to a new level. So, for example, this is the way in which you can have digital technology for collection and processing of information and for application in agriculture. And this is also with regard to access to markets, access to assets, access to services. So all these things can be entirely conducted on a new basis. So, there is a table there which gives the details of these different ways. For example, what are the technology, what are the features, what are the advantages, what are the challenges, and what are the evidence of impact that can already be seen. So, anybody having interest in knowing in more detail about the potential of the fourth industrial revolution technologies for rural development, for agriculture, can get a much more detailed picture from those documents. So, we talk about hands-free driving. So hands-free driving, it doesn't have to be a phenomenon only for the urban areas. Here is an example of hands-free agriculture. So you have machine with artificial intelligence equipped, it works by itself, and you can just, either be with it, follow it, or you can see what's going on from far away. So it's a completely new type of situation, a new type of rural development, new type of agriculture. Okay, so these are the potentials of the fourth industrial revolution. However, the question is how to make the best use of this potential. So you have to make a big leap. So most of the developing countries, low-income countries, in many cases, they're still using pre-industrial technology. They're still tilling with bullocks, and they are threshing with bullocks. They don't have machines, application of machines, etc. So from that stage to jump to this, the stage that I just, you just saw in the pictures that I showed in the previous slides. It's a big leap. However, it is possible, but to make a big leap, you have to have a strong base. Okay? Without a base, you cannot make a leap. If you are in a swamp, standing in a swamp, you cannot make a leap from there. Okay? So what are the elements of that base? First of all, you have to, in order to go to the fourth industrial revolution, countries need to first cross the first, second, and third industrial revolution, at least at a minimum level. That means people have to be educated. Yeah? Otherwise, they cannot use digital technology. They have to good health care. They have to have electricity. They have to have the infrastructure, roads, highways, etc. And they also have to have broadband interconnection. So these are kind of some of the essential prerequisites for a rural population to actually get to the fourth industrial revolution technologies and make that big leap and enter this new brave world. So only when a country is digitized, then it can use technology based on artificial intelligence, which is the hallmark of the fourth industrial revolution. The defenders of fourth industrial revolution concept, when they are asked that, what is different with you? What is different here than what is we already call digital revolution? The answer they provide is that in digital revolution that started with the computers, those did not involve use of artificial intelligence. So this is the main mark of the new fourth industrial revolution technologies. So, but in order to use that, you need to have this base. So most of the developing countries, they still lack in education, they lack in healthcare, they lack in electricity, infrastructure, and of course, broadband connection, etc., etc. So they have to cross these stages before they can make the leap to the fourth industrial revolution technologies. So there is a concerted effort that is necessary, and it has to be done both at national and global levels. Okay, so let me just draw some conclusions. So first of all, rural development remains an important task to address both poverty challenge and environmental challenge. Yeah? However, this task now has to be considered in the context of fourth industrial revolution. Okay? That's the new context in which it has to be viewed and considered. So it is necessary to come out from the misinterpretation of the Lewis model of growth and accord rural development a preceding role. Okay? Preceding role, not a residual role. Okay? So it's necessary to push the rural development agenda to the forefront and not treat it as an appendage of urban development. Okay? History of both early and new industrializing countries point to a preceding role of agricultural productivity growth and rural development in the overall industrialization and development process. This is how it happened in England. This is how it happened in France, in Japan, in most of the countries. That's how it happened. Okay? So you have to have first, sufficient productive growth in agriculture and rural development to reach this stage of, a broad scale and across the board industrialization process. Okay, so however, the main thing is that whereas so far until recently we were always talking about narrowing the rural-urban divide, But the fourth industrial revolution technologies, particularly this, undercutting the necessity of physical congregation, has created the situation when we can think of ending the divide, not just narrowing. We can talk about ending the rural-urban divide. So there can be even distribution of population, somewhat similar density of population across the across a country. Given the physical terrain, of course. Okay, so that's the new thing. So until recently, we have been talking about narrowing the divide. Now we can talk about ending the divide. That's because the technological rationale for the divide is now is undercut, and it's going, weakening, and it will disappear pretty soon. 3D printing is converting manufacturing technology into boutique operations. So we are seeing a realization of what Hegel called negation of negation. So not withering away of rural population, but evening out. Not withering away, not that in rural population will become 1%, 0.8% or whatever. No, that's not the prospect that we can see now. We can see rather a prospect of evening out of the density of population. However, that this again, the current development, rural development, this is creating the environmental challenge. So we need to, and the evening out of the population can also be helpful in dealing in confronting that challenge. However, the realization of the potential of fourth industrial revolution requires a minimum level, as I just mentioned, of absorption of the previous industrial revolution. So more prosaically, it requires achievement of very minimum level education, health, infrastructure, electricity, broadband connection, etc. But the important thing is that although this, this point that we need to overcome this divide has been on the agenda for a long time. But now, because of the advent of the fourth industrial revolution technologies, it has acquired a renewed urgency. Because otherwise, large swaths of people, in different countries will just miss the train, and in that case, the current divide will become even more stark and even more wide, and then it will be very destabilizing for the whole world as a whole. Okay, so that is why the reorientation of rural development is a global task. It's a global task, and not just for developing countries. So it requires a global, effort. In which both developed countries will also have to kind of join. They have their a lot of things to do, because as I mentioned, the way industrialization of agriculture has occurred in many of the developed countries has created a new challenge, this environmental challenge. So they have to deal with that challenge. At the same time, they have to assist the low-income developing countries in order to overcome this, in order to achieve this minimum level, which will help them to kind of get on with the new stage that is created by the advent of the fourth industrial revolution. So that's basically the ideas and the thoughts that I thought I would like to share with you. So I think I stayed. It's about, I took just about 50 minutes, right? Not an hour. So because I want to have more questions and more discussion to get more responses from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Islam. Thank you much for your visionary speech with new angles and global evidence. So I think we still have about half an hour for discussion. Any question or comments? If you want to speak, please unmute your microphone and raise your hand. Oh, Professor Hatta, please.
Well, thank you very much for very illuminating speech. If I understand correctly, I think what you, at least in my mind, I summarized your sort of talk in the following manner. Basically, when the Lewis model, if misinterpreted, implies that the people should move from the rural area to urban, and that's a solution to reduce the urban-rural divide. And so kind of physical movement of people from the rural to the urban was considered to be the solution for the urban divide. But you're saying that historically, introducing the schemes to improve the productivity in the rural area, kind of defined as a low density area, has been a very useful means to reduce the urban-rural divide. And now, with the advent of fourth industrial revolution, the improving the productivity in the rural area through digitization is can even wipe out the divide completely. Now, to this end, I think many things can be done by the private sector in trying to improve the productivity of the rural area. But you listed the some of the important items which public sector can take care of to help reduce this divide. And the preparation of internet connection, certainly that's a key element, and probably provision of electricity, which could be done to some extent by private sector, but probably some push from the public sector is necessary. And the last one is my question. You think that education is instrumental in sort of eliminating this divide. Now, I wonder if I have enough education to cope with this fourth industrial revolution. Exactly what kind of, and what level of education do you think the public sector should provide to the rural area as a minimum sort of content of education?
Should I answer? Or
yeah, please.
Okay. Now, first of all, Professor Hatta, thanks for your summary and also the question. Yeah, it's a very important question about the kind of education. Of course, education can be, of course, of many different levels and of many different types. But to enable the people to access these new technologies, what they need, first of all, literacy. Because in many countries, rural population, large number of, a large fraction of rural population is still illiterate. So if an illiterate person simply cannot, so that's the main thing. So a basic level of education, literacy, numeracy. So they have to read, they have to know the numbers, etc., etc. So that's the basic. Then they have to have this proficiency in handling the digitization, a little bit of digital. But one thing that is surprising is that in many developing countries, people, even with very little education, they have very eagerly taken on these new technologies, and they can do many things with their mobile phones, which maybe even you and I are not that proficient in doing it. I know, for example, in Bangladesh, I see even very people, very less educated people, very proficient in terms of using their mobile phones to carry out a lot of operations like banking operations and transfer of money, etc., information, marketing information. So I think people are very they don't need very high level of education, but they need a very basic level of education. Unfortunately, that little bit of education is lacking in many developing countries. So that is, I think, the thing, that probably a public sector is most better equipped to do that. And of course, in many other areas, private sector can play an important role. But in some of these important, some basic meeting the basic requirements, that's where a particular effort, intervention is needed. I think once these basic prerequisites can be met, people themselves can take it over. They have the energy, they have the enthusiasm, they have the, particularly the young people. You don't have to do too much for them to get engaged and exploit these new technologies.
I see.
But those are the basic hurdles that they have to be crossed, and that's where the role of the government is important.
Thank you very much.
I think the fourth industrial revolution actually can bring about many changes or chance to the rural area or traditionally less developed area. Maybe you know in recent year some inland province of China, such as Yunnan, Guizhou, their growth rate is very high because the coastal province give many support, as well as the central government give many support for their IT infrastructure development. So, yeah, as you said, although the fourth industrial revolution is important, but need some precondition, education and IT infrastructure. I think China did well, in particularly for the construction or development of the IT infrastructure. And maybe you also know that in recent years, Chinese government is encouraged to learn Germany. It means don't develop too many universities, but put the public investment focusing on the college training, focusing on the skill training.
Polytechnics.
If we check the students of college students of the advanced country and East Asian country, you can find that in Japan and in Germany, the population receiving higher education is not so high, around 40% maybe, below, I think below 50%. But in case of Taiwan, mainland China, South Korea, this percentage is I think near 70%, or even higher than 80% in some cities. So recently, Chinese government encouraged the province government or the university to develop the school for training skill, not for just for knowledge. I think it's a good direction. What's your thinking about this?
Yes, the German model is an interesting model where they try to have a large number and a large fraction of the youth directed to more employment oriented education, like through this vocational training institutions. So yes, so that's useful, and I think with the advent of and spread of the fourth industrial revolution technologies, that will be more important because it will be necessary to kind of to manage very sophisticated machines, which will require a lot of investment in terms of actual understanding of the processes. So in that regard, that will be helpful. And of course, there is a critique that whether that helps, that creates a person which very narrowly oriented, or who doesn't have a broader vision about the world, broader understanding, etc. So some balance there should be. I think it will be useful to have some balance, particularly I think if the high school level education does a good job in terms of instilling that broader understanding, then there will be balance with the vocational and specific technological training with the general education, so I think it's a strategy that can be quite effectively used when it is balanced with emphasis on the general education too.
Yeah, thank you. General education and skill training are both important, but need some balance. Thank you.
Right.
Maybe Pen-san, do you have some questions? No? Oh, Dr. Pen, please.
It's mute.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank AGI for organizing such a wonderful seminar. And thanks, Professor Dai, for inviting me to participate in this seminar. And most importantly, I would like to thank Professor Islam for giving us such a wonderful presentation. And back to back to the presentation today, Professor Islam has pointed out a very important phenomenon. Rural development has now been neglected in the academic or the practical era. And now it's time to considering rural development in the context of the fourth industrial revolution. And these ideas are very insightful and interesting. Thank you very much, Professor Islam. And instead of a question, I would like to share some observations or some my personal opinions. And I think the rural areas need to find the right industry to make their own economic growth in the fourth industrial revolution. And I'm a little curious why 3D printing is important and successful in other countries like Lanka. And according to my own observation, 3D printing is not very popular in China. But here in China, we maybe there is other type of the new industry is very important. I think it's the internet celebrity economy. It's like some many many people in the rural areas in the countryside, they broadcast their lives online, and they shoot their agricultural products or daily lives with their fans and make money from that way. I think why is there such a difference between countries, and how can we define or find the right industry for some specific country to make the economic growth? And that's my observations and the questions. And can Professor Islam, how do you think about that?
Right. No, thank you very much. I think, your observations are very correct. Each country and even a region within a country needs to identify its own, situation to select the kind of industries that it has to promote. So that's correct, and that was true for even the current period, or the and also that will be important in the going forward. The 3D printing is a general, it's a new technology that is not not confined to any particular area. It's a general change which may affect across the board. I mean, many types of, like the example that I showed, Myanmar, that company was using 3D printing to produce some agricultural tools. But you can, once you have this technology developed, you can use it to produce, like garments. You can produce garments, you can produce shoes, you can produce household items, etc. So that's a general purpose technology, general switch, general way, a new way of producing things. So that can be used in many different contexts. Now, the celebrity economy, it's of course, with the broadband and internet, web, there's a lot of different kind of economies are possible, and many kind of entertainments. It's a huge market for entertainment that is effective, that can be used. And also, it's also, the internet is also, in a sense, democratizing the opportunities for using one's talent, or marketing one's products that they can use, like so that is why, that's another way in which this can be made use of. In case of Sri Lanka that you mentioned, it was not an example of 3D printing. It's just an example of way in which you can provide the rural population a similar level of services that otherwise would have been enjoyed only by the rural population. So that's a different, that's the kind of arrangement in socio-economic and physical arrangement that can be that can provide a more balanced distribution of the privileges across the population, across both urban and rural population. So I think your observations are very correct. A particular economy, a particular country, particular region will have to search for its own niche where it can be successful. And for that, of course, sufficient investigation, research, etc., will be necessary. But it has created the potential. So that's why everywhere people will have to, rise up to kind of, to make use of it, because it requires a lot of drive, initiative, but it has made it possible for everybody to be part of the process. So that's an important change that we see with these technologies.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor.
Yeah, rather than manufacturing as industry, maybe online service will be more easier to succeed. For example, online education, online health check, online data analysis will be more successful for rural area or some less developed area.
Right, right.
Any other question or comments? We still have about 12 minutes. Professor Fan Jing, any questions?
Okay, one of my students can ask some questions.
Fan Jianbing.
No.
Welcome.
Hello, Professor Dan.
Yes. Hello.
Yeah, please.
Hello. Yeah, I'm very glad to see you again, because 15 years ago, I was a graduate student of Professor Fan. And now I'm working at the Nanjing Agricultural University.
Agriculture University,
yeah. So I'm very, it's very insightful of your presentation. And I'm very glad that you talk about the application of digital technology in the rural development and agriculture. Right. And as we are in Jiangsu province, which is the developed area in China, there is also many application of digital technologies in agriculture. And my question is, maybe the use of technology or digital technology will promote economic growth, but it will also result in income disparity. So what should the government do better?
That's a good question. Yes, that's a good question, because as you know, this digital technology, what we call it's creating a new type of technology where we have increasing returns to scale. So what that means is that once you have some innovation, you have an almost unlimited market to exploit. So that creates the opportunity for some people to get tremendously rich in a very short period of time, whereas in other people who may not have the talent and so they may lag behind. So you are very correct that it is also possible to that this will result into sudden increase in the income inequality. So that is why it is necessary for the government policy, public policies to take care of this kind of issues. Obviously, on the one hand, you don't want to curb talent. That means you don't want to discourage people from coming with innovative ideas, doing innovative things, and marketing it, and so that other people can also use it. But at the same time, you also have to take care of this enormous inequality that may result. So that's why the government can take necessary measures, like for example, we already have many different tools to kind of redistribute income, and so that it does not exceed a certain socially acceptable level. So those kind of policies can govern. So it has to balance. But on the one hand, it should not do anything that will stifle the innovation, that will kind of restrict new ideas coming forward, doing new things, producing new products. On the other hand, it also has to keep an eye on keeping the income inequality and asset inequality to a tolerable level, which does not disrupt the social cohesion. That is also important.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah.
By the way,
I'm glad that you have joined, because I think being from agriculture university, some of the things that we discussed today should be more relevant for you, right?
Yes, thank you.
By the way, Nanjing Agriculture University is one of two top agriculture university in China.
Mm-hmm.
Another one is China Agriculture University.
That one is in Beijing?
Yeah, one is in Beijing, another one is in Nanjing. Any other questions? Yeah, I found that there are a few students from Kyushu University.
Okay.
Actually, Professor Islam had taught in Kyushu, the graduate school of Kyushu University for 3 years.
Right. No, I liked it. So
Ling-san?
Yes.
Any questions?
Thank you, Professor. So for me, I just wondered about the 3D printing technology that it can be used in the production in the agriculture. So for me, I just wonder that does the 3D printing technology mainly used in the innovation, or which means the creating some tools, or it can also be used to product the tools? Can 3D printing technology used in the factory to product any useful tools, or it still needs a lot of skilled?
No, by 3D printing, we mean actual production of the product, like a machine, like an agricultural tool. That the example that I showed in the Myanmar example, they are actually using that 3D printing to actually produce a tool, like a threshing machine or a harvesting machine, whatever. So the thing is that with 3D printing, most of the effort, because it requires programming, you have to program the way in which this, you have to instruct the machine to do things that you want it to do. And the way you do it is you program. You develop the software that will instruct the machine to process certain things. So that's where the main effort will be going forward. But once that program is formulated, created, and it is run, and it proves to be working, then the actual printing and actual operation of that becomes simple. Because you have that program, you just then you gather the essential raw material that will be needed, and you just feed those raw materials into the machine, and you press the button to run that program, and at the end of the process, you get a product. So it is a very different way in which production takes place. So currently, the actual production requires a lot of skilled workers. They have to be skilled in doing certain things. But with 3D printing, you may not require that many skilled workers to actual operation. Like, a photocopy, right? When you do a photocopy, you don't need too much skill. You just go and you make a photocopy. But the main effort there is in producing that photocopier machine. So once the photocopier machine is there, you can easily copy like FedEx or in, I don't know, in Japan or in China, you have other names, but you have corner shops where you can go and you can make copies, right? So, or you can print something. So 3D printing will be something similar like that. So you have a machine which can print not two-dimensional pages as we now do when you go to a photocopying machine, we print something, but it will produce a 3-dimensional actual object. And so the main effort in doing so will go in the creating that machine and programming it. But once that is done by the group of people who will do it, then the actual user or the operator, he or she does not have to be that skilled, because he or she does not need to know what goes inside and what are the computer language, etc., etc. All he or she will need is how much of different raw materials will have to be fed and which button to be pressed, and at the end, you get the machine produces, uses the raw material and produces that product, and you just get the product, you go home. That's how it will work.
Okay, I understand. Thank you very much, Professor.
Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Ling-san. Any questions?
I see my old colleagues Sakamoto and Kishimoto still here. Hi, Hiroshi Sakamoto-san, Kishimoto-san, how are you?
Yeah, maybe after the seminar, we still will arrange additional time for exchange some idea. They are your older colleague.
Right.
Yeah, actually, the fourth industrial revolution, I think, largely decreased the importance of agglomeration. So
physical agglomeration, but now you can have agglomeration virtually. Like the Facebook company is creating a virtual world. It's called metaverse. So unlike previously, you needed agglomeration because you could, physical interaction, you could, share ideas, you can benefit. But now you can do it virtually, so you don't have to come physically.
Yes. So not only to the rural area, also to small or middle scale cities such as Kitakyushu, it's easy for us to organize the international seminar, invite a famous scholar like you. So it will bring about many chance to the small or middle scale city, not Tokyo, not Shanghai, not New York. Oh, sorry. So your importance in New York will decrease.
Yeah, exactly. Now it's it's a democratization in a sense. Everybody being put on a level playing field. So that's a very different world that we are entering. It's a good thing, it's a good thing. Yeah. And for example, in the internet, your email address is as good as a president's email address. The internet does not know who is a president and who is an ordinary citizen. So it's equal. And like Facebook, you can have as many friends as any other person can have. And so it's all open now. So previously it was a very different world, very unequal world. So those are important changes that are happening.
After you left Kitakyushu for New York, the population in Kitakyushu is decreasing year by year. But by the way, now Professor Hata and I, want to keep the population of Kitakyushu unchanged or increase again, we think there will be some chance with the help of the fourth industrial revolution.
That's
What's the idea of Professor Hatta?
Well, definitely. I think we have chance. And I think the fact that our cities has certain physical agglomeration also helps to have this virtual agglomeration. I think they go together.
Yeah.
Yeah. Traditionally, rural is observed to urban, but in Japan, sometimes the whole Japan is divided in two parts: 3 metropolitan area and other area. This other area sometimes is called the rural area. So the rural, the meaning of rural become very broad now. Not just countryside. Strict speaking, it's a non-metropolitan area. So your speech is, I think, is not only helpful for the consideration for the rural, the traditional rural area, but also to the non-metropolitan area.
Right.
A little different.
No, each country differs in terms of, its geographical distribution.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, time's over. Because of the time constraint, I would like to close this seminar. Thank you very much, Professor Islam, for your time and for your visionary speech. Let's send a round of big applause.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I was very happy to come back to AGI and meet many old colleagues and new colleagues, and also very happy to see Fanjin and others from China, and also students from Kyushu University where I taught. So it's all very nice, very good. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Also, I want to thank all participants for joining this seminar. Usually, AGI seminar is held in the afternoon. Today is a special, maybe the first time for our seminar being held in the morning. So thank you very much for your cooperation.